it doesn't always look the way people expect. Loneliness, sometimes it wears a nice outfit, shows up on time, joins the conversation, smiles at the right moments. Sometimes it laughs too loud or listens too well. Sometimes it looks like someone who has it all together and quietly feels like they're fading. You can be in a room full of voices and still feel like no one is really speaking to you. You can sit at a table with people who love you and still feel like you're holding a secret you can't name, not because you're hiding, but because you're tired. Tired of being on, tired of having something to say, tired of performing the version of yourself that fits. There was a time not long ago where I sat at a dinner table with people I genuinely cared about, and I remember looking around, nodding along, smiling when I should, but inside it felt like I was behind glass, not angry, not sad, just not there. I didn't know how to explain that kind of absence. It wasn't depression, exactly. It wasn't disconnection from them. It was disconnection from me. I don't think we talk enough about that kind of loneliness. The quiet kind, the kind you carry while doing everything right, the kind that sneaks in when you're fully functioning, the kind that doesn't raise red flags but slowly dulls your colors. And here's the strange part. You can go years like that and not even realize it. You can keep showing up, being kind, doing the right thing, and never notice that you've stopped feeling like a whole person. You've become a version of yourself you know how to maintain, not because you're fake, but because that's the version that gets things done, that makes sense to others, that doesn't ask for too much. But late at night, when it's quiet and no one's watching, something aches. Not loud, not sharp, but deep, like an echo of yourself you forgot to listen to. And if you're here reading this, hearing this, maybe you know exactly what I mean. Maybe there's a part of you that's been whispering beneath the noise. I don't feel like I'm really here anymore. That whisper is not weakness. It's the beginning of return. Because the kind of loneliness you can't explain is usually the loneliness of being too far from yourself. And the first step back isn't dramatic. It's not quitting your life or running away or becoming someone new. It's noticing. It's hearing that whisper and saying, I hear you. Sometimes that's all it takes to begin again. I once heard about a man who left everything behind, not out of bitterness, not because life had failed him, but because somewhere along the way, he realized he couldn't hear himself anymore. He had a good job, I think. People said he was respected, lived in a high-rise, smiled in elevators, knew where to find the best espresso downtown, the kind of person who made everything look easy until one day he just left. No dramatic goodbye, no long message, just packed up and drove north, toward the quiet. He found a small cabin near a lake, the kind you don't see on maps. No signal, no routine, just trees, wind, and his own heartbeat. Some people said he was having a breakdown. Some said it was selfish. Others assumed something terrible had happened. But those who listened closely, those who paid attention, said something else. They said he just needed to disappear into silence for a while. Not to run away from the world, but to remember who he was before the world taught him how to perform. Because it's easy, isn't it? To become a version of yourself that works, that's efficient, agreeable, useful. But somewhere under all that functioning, a kidder truth waits. And sometimes, you can only hear it when everything else goes still. They say the first week was the hardest. He kept reaching for his phone that wasn't there. He kept trying to check things, the time, the weather, the news, his email. His mind buzzed like a machine still running, even though the power had already been cut. But slowly, the silence stopped feeling like emptiness. It began to feel like space. Space to notice how shallow his breathing had become. Space to sit with thoughts he'd buried under schedules. Space to feel feelings he hadn't named in years. One night, he wrote something in a notebook. Not to be read, not to be shared. Just a sentence. I'm not sure who I am without the noise, but I want to find out. And I think about that often, because so many of us live with the noise, external and internal. Notifications, conversations, obligations, and beneath all of it, a hum of tension that never seems to stop. So, What happens when we let ourselves go quiet? Not forever, not in isolation, but just long enough to hear the forgotten parts, the soft voice beneath the performance, the truth that doesn't need to impress anyone to be real. That man, I don't know where he is now. Maybe he returned, maybe he stayed, but part of me believes he didn't disappear. He just finally arrived, to himself. There are parts of you that never got to speak, not because they had nothing to say, but because the world around you didn't know how to listen. Maybe it happened young. Maybe the moment you cried too long, someone told you to hush. Maybe the first time you got angry, someone called you dramatic. Or the time you were scared, and someone laughed it off. And so you learned without anyone having to say it outright, that some parts of you were too much, too soft, too messy, too complicated. And you buried them, not in hatred, but in protection. You wrapped silence around your sadness. You pressed smiles into your fear. You polished yourself into someone who looked fine, even when you were falling apart. And the world rewarded you for it. It applauded your strength. It admired your emotional intelligence. It praised how calm and collected you always seemed. But inside, you carried rooms of unspoken things. Grief that never had a place to land. Anger you were too ashamed to admit. Needs you convinced yourself were burdens. No one told you that the version of you who suppressed everything wasn't you. It was armor. Armor built out of necessity, but heavy all the same. And eventually, you started to wonder why you felt so exhausted, why joy felt out of reach, why silence felt threatening, why you could be loved and still feel invisible. Maybe it's because there's a part of you still waiting, not for someone else to fix it, but for you to turn inward and say, I see you. I've missed you. You can come out now. The shadow isn't a monster. It's not evil. It's just the parts of you that were taught they didn't belong. But they do. Even the bitterness, even the jealousy, even the quiet ache you carry when no one's around. They're not evidence of your brokenness. They're proof that you were real, and that no one showed you what to do with that truth. So maybe tonight, you sit in a room where nothing needs to be perfect, where you don't have to smile, where you can cry without a reason, where you can feel without filtering. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you'll feel less alone, not because someone came to save you, but because you finally stopped hiding from yourself. And that's where real healing begins. I once knew a woman who always sat facing the window. She never said much during group conversations, not because she was shy, but because it felt like too many voices scattered her thoughts. We weren't close, not really, but she left an impression on me the way quiet people sometimes do without meaning to. She told me once, over lukewarm tea in a break room no one used, I can't really think when people are around. I don't mean that in a rude way, it's just my brain needs silence to know what it feels. And I've never forgotten that. Because the world doesn't always understand people like her. People who drift a little, who pause before speaking, who don't always join in, who often choose the long way home, just for a moment of stillness. There's a gentleness in people like that. Not weakness, never that, but a kind of sacred slowness that's become rare in a world obsessed with speed. She once said something else that stuck with me. I don't want to be alone because I hate company. I just want to be alone enough to hear myself think before everyone else's noise starts sounding like my own. That sentence sat in me like a stone in water, sinking slowly, reshaping things I hadn't even realized were there. Because haven't we all had moments like that? Where the opinions, the updates, the conversations, even the well-meaning ones, begin to fill the space where our own clarity is supposed to grow? She wasn't escaping life. She was protecting something small and precious, the part of her that could only unfold when no one was looking. Some mornings I'd see her sitting on a bench outside the building, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. And maybe she was. Maybe it was the rhythm of her own thoughts finally returning. Maybe it was an idea she hadn't been able to reach in a crowded room. Maybe it was just peace, not in the big, dramatic way. Just quiet peace. the kind that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. We lost touch eventually, as people do, but when the world feels too fast now, or too loud, I remember her. The woman who didn't need applause to know she was doing life her way, who understood that solitude wasn't isolation, it was alignment. And maybe that's something more of us are craving than we're willing to admit. Not to be alone forever, not to disappear, but just to think again, to breathe, to return to the quiet place where real thoughts, real feelings, real self still live. There's a quiet judgment in the air when someone steps back. Maybe you felt it when you didn't show up for a gathering, when you didn't reply right away, when you canceled plans without offering a dramatic excuse. People tilt their heads and say, "Are you okay?" And sometimes, what they really mean is, "Why aren't you doing what we expected of you?" It's easy to confuse retreat with running away, but they're not the same. Running away is fueled by fear, a desperate escape, a pushing away of the world before it can hurt you again. But returning to yourself, that's different. That's sacred. It's the pause you take when the noise outside is drowning out the voice inside. It's the moment you realize you've been performing a version of yourself for too long, and you miss who you were before the applause. I once knew someone, a neighbor, the kind who always waved but never stayed long enough to talk. Then, one day, she stopped showing up. No morning run, no small talk by the mailbox, just gone. People whispered, "Burnout, a breakup?" Something must have happened. Months later, I ran into her not where I expected. She was sitting cross-legged in the park, sketching a tree with a tiny pencil and no phone in sight. Her face wasn't lit up with joy, but it was steady, present. She looked up, smiled, and said, "I didn't leave. I just came back to me." That sentence, I carry it with me. Because sometimes you need to disappear, not from life, but from the version of it that keeps you far from yourself. Sometimes you stop answering because your soul is too full of noise. Sometimes you say no, not because you're broken, but because you're finally choosing softness over survival. And yes, the world might misunderstand. It might call you distant, detached, too sensitive, too quiet, too much of your own company. Let it say what it wants. Only you know the weight you've been carrying. Only you know how far you've drifted from the core of who you are. And only you can choose when it's time to stop orbiting expectations and return. Return to slow mornings, to words that come from stillness, to laughter that isn't performed, to a kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. So no, you're not running away. You're walking home, barefoot maybe, bruised maybe, but honest. And that kind of return, that's not weakness, that's wisdom. No one saw the moment I came back to myself. There was no celebration, no camera, no tearful breakdown or powerful breakthrough, just a quiet morning, a slow breath, and a sudden realization that I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. It was raining, not heavily, just a soft, steady kind of rain that makes everything smell like earth and memory. And I was sitting by the window with no plan, no purpose, no script to follow. And I thought, this is it. This is the moment I've been chasing, without even knowing I was chasing it. Not because everything was fixed, not because I had answers, but because, for once, I wasn't performing. I wasn't editing my words before I spoke them. I wasn't calculating how I looked, or what I should feel, or who I needed to be next. I was just here, and I didn't feel like I owed that moment to anyone. That's when I realized something no one had ever told me. Wholeness doesn't require an audience. You don't need to be witnessed to be real. You don't need to be applauded to be enough. You don't need to explain your softness to anyone, not even the people you love. Some of the most sacred parts of your becoming will happen in rooms no one sees, in quiet surrenders, in honest conversations with your own reflection, in the way your breath slows when you finally let yourself rest. And the world may never know. They may only see the outer layer, the calm, the composure, the you that returns after the storm. But you'll know. You'll remember the long walk back. You'll carry the memory of what it took to unclench, to forgive yourself, to be enough, even in stillness. So if you're here, somewhere between unraveling and returning, this is your reminder. You don't need to prove anything to be worthy of peace. You don't have to be watched to be real. You can heal privately. You can grow quietly. You can bloom without needing to be picked. Let the quiet parts of you be holy. Let the unseen parts of your healing be sacred. Let the slow, silent unfolding of your wholeness be enough. Even if no one claps, no one notices, no one says, "Look how far you've come." Because you know. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful kind of freedom. If you've made it this far, you didn't just listen to words. You let them touch something quiet inside you. And that matters more than you know. Maybe you didn't cry. Maybe you didn't have an epiphany. Maybe you didn't even agree with everything said here. That's okay. This was never about changing you. It was about meeting you in that in-between place where most of us live, between knowing and not knowing, between holding on and slowly loosening our grip. I'm not here to give you answers. I don't have a map. I'm walking through my own silences, my own shadows, my own slow returns. But before this closes, I just want to offer something soft, an invitation, not to fix yourself, not to rush your healing, not to chase after some brighter, better version of you, just to notice how often you move without asking why, to notice what softens you and what hardens you, to notice what parts of you are asking to be heard even if you don't know how to answer yet. There is no deadline on your becoming, no applause required for your peace, no script to follow when it comes to being whole. You are allowed to be quiet, to take your time, to walk slower, to love deeper, to start again as many times as you need. And when the noise gets loud again, as it always does, come back here, not just to these words, but to this feeling, this soft pause between what was and what could be. You'll find yourself there. You always do.